we have this natural ability to change and regulate our nervous system and our brainwaves. Our energetic system, our nervous system, which is basically the computer of our bodies, it tells us how to feel. It tells us whether we are in rest and restore or we're fight or flight. And because we're in such a stimulated world, our bodies are spending a lot of time in fight or flight, even if we don't really think we're stressed or freaked out. But this time and this dance between the two is becoming sluggish because of the overstimulation and so forth. And so energetically, more and more people are finding that they're having a lot of like physical ailments like insomnia, headaches, body aches, all these things, which are typical signs of us being energetically off. You have the ability within yourself to change how you feel, and in turn, how you make others feel and how you connect with others through simple things like regulating your breath.
I'm excited for our conversations. Thank you. Conversations. Yeah, I guess this is like my future self, knowing that we're going to have more conversations.
100%.
We've been talking already, and it's fun when you get to meet people that when you talk to them, you feel like you've known each other for a while. Mm-hmm. And that's how I feel with you. Like when I went to one of the events that you had in your studio, that's how I felt. You know, you were very welcoming, you were very open, you were, you know, sharing your story. And that day I was like, oh, I really love the way that she just really opened up her heart and just shared. So that was the day that I was like, I would love to have her in the podcast. So I'm really glad that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It means a lot.
Yeah. So I definitely want to talk about all of the beautiful offerings that you have in your beautiful studio. Before we get there, I usually like to get to know my guests a little bit more. Yeah. So if you feel like sharing, where were you born? Okay. How was your upbringing? Things that come to mind that shaped the Sabrina that you are today. Anything that you want to share with me, with the audience?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in New York City. I lived there till I was 24. I grew up in Spanish Harlem, which looked and felt really differently in the 80s and 90s than it does now. It's crazy to think of what people are paying to live there. We grew up in like a railroad style apartment. I think my mom paid like maybe $300 a month. Oh. And so, yeah, I think growing up in New York City is very much still ingrained in my DNA of who I am at 44. A lot of my work ethic, street smarts for sure, based on kind of the environment that I grew up in. Also a lot of my awareness on not being attached to a narrative. So I grew up in a relatively, not so great neighborhood, surrounded by either people that became addicts or they were the ones supplying the drugs. There were young girls getting pregnant. I remember like being like bullied as a kid for not, for having a certain kind of hair texture, for going to school and not being pregnant at 16 and all these different things, because that was kind of the norm in my neighborhood. And I remember before I left and moved to Miami, just kind of like having this moment of seeing the potential in so many friends and things that I grew up with that wouldn't leave this neighborhood or like never thought of ever leaving this like box, because they had accepted that like this is what it was, right? Like that this is like, I'm that kid from Spanish Harlem and that's what I'm always going to be. And I didn't know my dad or my mom left us, or I got pregnant at 16. Y ya, como que like they accepted it and that was it and they were done. And 100% it shaped, how I view things. And, when I think about or share the things that I saw growing up aren't necessarily as common or natural for someone else, but it was my normal. But also being sure that I was not like, well, that's like I can't leave this neighborhood, or I can never apply to a good school or do this or do that because I grew up here or I was a product of X. And so that was kind of the first big awareness that I think I apply in my life now, of the things that have occurred to me are just things that occur to me, and it isn't who I am, right? And obviously they shape you. You take lessons if you can and grow from it, but not attaching myself to that narrative. But I definitely think like the work ethic, the melting pot of growing up in a city like that, of just acceptance and really making sure like inclusivity and that like meeting people where they are, and that everyone has a story, and that like we don't know what's going on in people's lives. Like New York was kind of like the training camp for that, of like, don't judge a book by its cover. And then also being really open to like, you know, the things I saw on the train station and growing up. Like I just like, my weird barometer is like very, you know, like I'm like, weird is wonderful. Like we're all weird and we have to be a little kooky and all of that. And so, you know, there were definitely beautiful things. There are also things that I have awareness now of a little bit of like hardness, which is why I lead so much through heart and vulnerability. Is, you know, for the most part of my childhood, I was raised by a single mom. And, you know, I hated my stepdad, all the typical check boxes. Right. And so, you know, I had great jobs I was really fortunate to have really great careers very early on. 'Cause in New York, you start early or you don't survive. And, but not letting it harden me in terms of like being so tough. Right. There was like this, and, there was this edge that I had that was almost unnecessary, right? And there was a fine line between like showing that I had drive and that I was smart and that I could hold my own without coming across like a bitch, basically, and arrogant or just not nice or not open. And so that definitely shaped that. Obviously, being raised by my grandmother and my mom. My grandmother predominantly, my mom worked, so my grandmother really is who raised me. It's how I was able to hold on to like the Latin roots, because despite New York City being so melting pot and being in Spanish Harlem, I worked in corporate, and so I always had this like duality of like being this New York City gringa and then like coming back to my grandmother who spoke no English and so forth. And then my mom married an American, and we stopped speaking Spanish in the house. And so it was like I didn't feel as connected. And I think that coming to Miami for the first time in 2004 helped kind of like this awareness of wanting to honor you know, essentially my heritage. And also there's also an opportunity or what just Latins in terms of like how we celebrate life, right? And this loudness of living that I had kind of like tapered down because I was in such a corporate mindset. And despite New York being this vibrant city, when you're in the grind, right? And so I moved here originally and hated it in 2004. Miami was very different then. And I went to go live in Mexico City. Okay. And that's kind of where everything started. And so being this obnoxious 24-year-old who was very on edge and aggressive in not a good way, my brother is like, I think you should go to a little Kundalini class with me. And I'm like, oh, what? And, you know, and like growing up in New York City and like it was like hippies. Like it wasn't like you didn't do that. It was like, you know, at Woodstock, like that was like it. And so, you know, I knew of yoga, but like it wasn't, you know, any of that. And although it felt very cultish to me, what I love science. I've always been like into planets and like I could spend hours. Like that's where like that was like my babysitter unofficially was a planetarium in New York City. Like that's like where I would be dropped off for hours because I knew that I would be fully entertained. And so understanding the science of the energy and how we move it in our body and how we can move it in our body, Kundalini sparked that for me. And so I was in Mexico for a couple of years and then moved back to Miami, but I would say that like those two places, right? Of obviously New York City is like the bulk of my kind of like major adolescent time. And, you know, I did things that most teenagers wouldn't do, right? That like I meet friends now and they're like, oh my God, I've never done that. And I'm like, well, you know, it's kind of par for the course. It happens when you're in New York. And so I got a lot of things out of my system very early. I also have like a level, I think, of fear that like I'm willing to take big risks, and I have a higher tolerance, I would say, of things that perhaps make people afraid, or because of growing up in New York City, you kind of like have to hold your own, and how that translates, right? But again, finding that softness within that has been my constant, right? And now that I'm in this work, you know, framing it as in terms of like my masculinity and my femininity, but it's more of knowing that it takes courage to be both, right? Soft and strong, but ensuring that like you don't close yourself off in either of the two, or that you don't super expose yourself to the point of, you know, depletion when you're like being so soft and open and giving. So that's been my dance. But the two cities are very similar, but they both shaped me in terms of, you know, I know that my company and the things that I've done and I've been successful at, and, you know, opened and closed businesses and all these things came from the work ethic and drive that living in that city gives you, because, you know, you either sink or swim. And Mexico is this beautiful, you know, my half brother is Mexican, and we have the same mom, different dads. And it's huge, right? It's bigger than New York in terms of population and all these things. But the art of slow living in Mexico, right? Despite all of the industries and all the things, and obviously there's disparity in incomes and all these things, but the art of slow living and really like savoring family time and meals and just culture and honoring and all of that, it just sparked something in me that it was like, okay, like I can live both, right? Like I can savor the moment and life and still be this badass in corporate that I want, and you know, and it's okay, and I don't have to like give up everything and my belongings and never eat meat and never have a taco pastor again because I'm going to become this like, you know, kundalini master. And so the two, I think, have really helped kind of the foundation of it. And then finally, like admitting that I had to give Miami a chance. And if I wanted this to be home, I needed to be here and plant roots. And so, yeah, so I think those two exposed me to the right things to give me, you know, enough foundation to build upon. Yeah.
Something that comes to mind, because you talked about this ability to not identify with the things that you lived and the things that you saw when you were growing up. Do you think that was just naturally the way that you were wired, or was there anything that you learned, books that you read, or someone that kind of like shared that with you or showed you that?
I think it was more of, and it's still work, right? Like, you know, being divorced, and this is the second divorce for me, and not the first divorce, right? That's all, like, that was my narrative. And I was like, I just got divorced. And my friends were like, hey, it happened a year ago, you know, and it was always like and I was like, okay, it happened to me, but it's not me, right? It's not Sabrina. And so it's still, right, you have to, you know, be aware of it. But for me, it was the sensation of witnessing people use that as their why. And so it wasn't necessarily a wiring, but it was more of like, it would upset me when I would notice or see people's potential or have conversations, and they're like, I just can't because we're here. And I'm like, and like, leave, like, let's go, like, you know, or do something about it. And the same thing was like also working in corporate, right? Like, there are people that are discontent with their jobs, and obviously there's we have to have a means to survive. So it can't be like, I don't like this place, I'm leaving. But there does reach a point, I believe, that if you're so discontent with a situation that you're in, there's a choice, right? And I guess because of the trainings and all the things that I came from being in corporate and sales and operations, it's coming from a place of solution, right? And if not, you're just complaining, right? And I think that like that's definitely a trigger of mine, of like people who complain often, and it's like we have choice, and if you know, what you allow will continue, right? And if you're gonna if you're not happy here, and stay, right? And obviously like bigger story like of means and, you know, having the money and the ability or being tied to your family. Like so many of my friends growing up were, you know, responsible for like their brother and sisters because the kids were out working, and, you know, or even having kids of their own young, or, you know, just not being able to. And so it's much, you know, it's easier said than done, but I think it wasn't necessarily like a book or someone. I mean, I had wonderful teachers. Like I will say, like, as much as, you know, the being raised by a single mom in New York City and so forth, like my grandmother lived in a really good neighborhood, in a senior home. And so we like lied on all my schools that I'd lived with her, because if not, I was going to be slated to like the schools that had like 60 kids per class. And my mom is like a literary genius, and was like, she hated the books that they'd give me in school, and would make me read books and like give her book reports because she didn't agree with any of the books. Like I read Catcher in the Rye in like 3rd grade. It was like unnecessary to be reading at this age.
Not familiar with that.
Okay, great book. So and so I went to great schools, like magnet public schools, but like, you know, great schools, and I had some beautiful teachers. And I think it was a combination. It wasn't like a specific mentor or teacher, but I think that it was, you know, to be a teacher in New York City, you get this, again, array, especially in public schools, you get an array. And the magnet schools essentially were designed for those that couldn't afford private schools, with a private school level of education. And so as a teacher, I can imagine it being so rewarding to have kids that came from X neighborhoods be able to excel and have these really cool dialogues. And our school was portfolio based versus exams. And so we had to like write thesis papers and like have like really cool dialects, and it was like arts. It was just, and so I think that just knowing and seeing that, right? Like living, knowing that like I knew half my class like went back to like shitty situations, you know, but when we were in school, it was a different, and like I that's what made me see the potential in people, right? Is that I knew that if we took ourselves out of that situation, with support from people that also saw that in us, you can make the shift. And so I think it was just a personal, where it was ingrained from, you know, I don't know, but it was more of like a personal trigger of, if there is something that you don't like or that you have an issue with and so forth, like I believe we have choice to where our limits can take us, you know, within the means that we have. And so I think it's just kind of just living it, experiencing, and noticing that like it bothered me when people didn't see it, you know, which is an overarching pattern in my life in terms of like seeing the potential in others. It's great in career, as a leader and like all of that. Not so great when you use that as your lens in your personal life, because then you end up falling in love with the potential of someone versus who they are in this current shape, way, and form. And so also the dance of that, of knowing when to apply that theory to your life. So
that is amazing to hear how much the schooling system will impact, in a way, you know, the way that you, I mean, I feel like we all know this, but I feel like our society needs more of these examples to really make this shift and this change that I think our society is asking for so much. So I really love to hear that, because something that really is always in my mind is, how can we improve the way that we are raised and the things that we are shown as we grow up, so that our potential, right, gets really maximized, right? Like I feel like we all have our own genius, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because of the schooling system, there's only one way in which there's one type of intelligence, I guess, is being highlighted
Mm-hmm.
and almost like, just like explored.
Yeah.
So many people feel like they are not smart enough, good enough, whatever.
Yeah.
So I just love that one share. I'm curious. So when was that first yoga class that you attended? Or was it the yoga class that kind of like started to change everything, that Kundalini class that your brother suggested?
So in Mexico, Kundalini was kind of my first approach. And then I was seeing a Mexican soccer player. It's very cliche. While I was living there, and I was in my 20s, so no judgment. And his team, they had to do yoga. It was part of their coach was like, this is the best mobility, as well as like handling the stress and pressures of being a professional team. And so they did yoga. And so we did yoga together. We had a friend. It's actually, one of the things that came out of that relationship, a dear friend who I just saw her when I was in Mexico 2 months ago. And she was our teacher. And she's one of the most fabulous Ashtanga teachers, and just got me really connected to my body. And I think that as beautiful as it was to grow up in New York City, and I wouldn't trade kind of all the street smarts and intuition that I have from growing up in that, the other piece of it is when you're, my nervous system, like I was constantly going, right? Like you're, as a kid, as a female, as a young girl, and I grew up in the era of like kids getting robbed in the train and, for their jackets and their things and their shoes and all these different things. And, you're always on, right? Like walking out of your house, getting to the train station, getting out of the train station, going to school, like hanging out with your friends, like all the things. And so I was numb. I was always on guard, right? And this armor. And so not only about the hardening, but it was just you become, when you're so much in fight or flight, right? You lose connection to your body. And so that was the biggest aha for me, was the disconnect that I had, and also understanding how my body stored the 24 years of living in New York City, right? And there were some beautiful stories and there were not so beautiful stories. And my body had stored all of that, and my inability to move and allow myself to feel, because there's also that conversation of, you got to be tough, kid, because you live in New York, and that narrative. And so that was really the big aha. I started to really unravel there. And my mom has suffered from agoraphobia, which is the fear of leaving home my entire life. Like she was mainly homebound most of my growing up, and lived like, she would 5-block radius of where our apartment was like her limit without having to be like medicated. And for the most part, she didn't want to medicate. So this was like her little world. And so in turn, right, like that affected like her coming to my graduation, my shows, like all different things, right? And so my aha moment was like, holy shit, like I feel less anxious. This will probably work for my mom. And so like anything, and just, I like knowledge, right? I think that knowledge is necessary, but paired with action is where like the magic happens. And so I started to learn, and more so for myself. I've never had any intention of teaching. That didn't happen till 2016, and which was almost 10 years later. And it was just learning. And so I learned breath work and yoga for myself. And I could not get my mom into yoga at all. But
what was her resistance?
The physical. She's had heart attacks. Like it was more of like, there's also a point of like taking someone to the edge and like discomfort. And then it was like, this shouldn't be painful. And it just wasn't her thing. And also not forcing it, but the breath work she loved. And it did help with like giving her a resource and a tool for onsets of her panic attacks and so forth. And when you have a heart attack, they feel very similar to panic attacks. And so she was also always then scared that she was having another heart attack when she'd have the triggers of a panic. And it was like, wait, we have to take this seriously, because what if it is another heart attack? And it was, always this. So she was always a little bit also on edge. And so the breath work helped. And, she would call me if it didn't calm her down, and I would do a meditation over the phone with her and all that stuff. And so it was really nice to see and live that, right? So obviously I had my own personal testimonial of how it helped me like just chill the fuck out. But seeing that like someone who was, you know, in her 60s, this is new. And, you know, she was the era of the yogis and the burning the bra, and, you know, she was like a total hippie. But like not necessarily like full on into that. So it was new for her to see her embrace, and also seeing that I was like, she's very stubborn, we're very similar, that she was open to trying. I was like, okay, well maybe like I'm a little persuasive and I could like teach and share, but never really. But that's what sparked it all is, and I just, you know, I did my first yoga certification more so because I had a back injury, a really bad back injury. I still have it. And it was a very humbling experience. It changed my entire practice. But what I realized, sadly, is a 200, you know, depending on where you get your yoga certification, your knowledge of anatomy and injuries is limited, right? And so I found that some teachers could cater to my injury and some made it worse. And so I was like, I need to get certified. So if I'm going to continue this as my personal practice, to understand what modifications I have to make and understand really what this means for my body, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, no intention of teaching, simply for myself. And yeah, so definitely that one yoga class sparked, you know, something, but I still have the drive of the corporate mindset and needing to create and work and help people, you know, start their businesses and create systems, and, you know, the marketing and the branding piece of it, that all still exists, but it took a while for the mindful piece to be like, wait a minute, like, I don't want this to be like a passion or just a personal practice. There's more to this here, but that was the seed. That was, you know, that first yoga class was a total seed to how Tao connection came to life.
Yeah. So what was your corporate job before?
So I've lived a couple of lives. I went to school for fashion merchandising. So I went to FIT in New York. And so I worked for the Gap in the merchandising department I was with them for 9 years. And then when I moved here, I was fortunate enough to keep my same job per se, but it really didn't exist here. And so I went from having like a whole district in New York to like very limited stores here. And it wasn't the same. It was very hard for me, but I decided to leave. And I was like, well, now what? Like, what do I do? And so I started working in a cruise ship advertising company. I was selling advertising to the Caribbean. And from that, very quickly realized that like I was good in sales and connecting with people and building trust and so forth, that I started working with one of our clients who was in the watch and jewelry realm. And so it was luxury goods. And I would sell to the retailers that originally would buy advertising from me, were now buying physical product from me. And I covered Caribbean, Mexico, and Canada, and then the US. And so I went from like sales manager to director of wholesale and did that for a long time. But what was great was that we worked for some really beautiful brands that we also did their marketing and branding, and we helped them make their sales presentations and their decks and like how to tell their story. And I really understood the importance of storytelling when it came to your business, and how, you know, I think some of the things that my skill set that allowed me to be good at sales was my ability to gain trust and to get to know my clients and not make it transactional. And just because I had a new item, I'm like, it's ugly, don't buy it. Like, versus like throwing it down their throat just because I had to make sales, right? And like remembering their kids' birthdays and their anniversaries and sending them Christmas cards and all these different things that I knew mattered in the grand scheme of this relationship, right? And treating it like a relationship. And so all of those things definitely have helped all those different responsibilities. And so I decided to go off on my own and consult for clients looking for this kind of holistic approach to telling your story, right? And also helping you with your sales, because most often sales and marketing get very blurred, and they usually don't get along, and they don't understand each other as departments, right? And the salesperson just wants to sell, and the marketing person wants to tell these beautiful, extravagant stories, and they're like, cool, but like, no, like, how do we? And so I understood both worlds. And so my company was essentially positioning on how to help you really marry the two and streamline your processes. And it was either like for rebranding or brand new products. Usually it was someone that was looking for like a rebrand or a restructure. And, I took on these projects. And so it was, great to be able to do that. And I went from working for someone else to working for myself. And in that time, I was still practicing. These practices were very much part of my personal day-to-day. And then I was now married. So this is my first marriage. I was with him for almost 9 years. And we reached a huge personal bridge. And one of the asks to get us over this bridge was for me to stop traveling and working as much as I was. And that was kind of how this all, like how Connection started, is I went from working in a very, huge capacity, a lot of clients, traveling, helping all these, businesses and brands. And I went to go work for Lululemon. And it was a huge blow to my ego, because I was like, now I'm selling stretchy pants, and here we are. And
this was because of this agreement that you
made.
So
in full transparency, so my first husband battled addiction. And when I found out and it came to surface and so forth, there was choice on like, do I stay with him or do I not? And for me, my best friend was in a dark place. And I was like, okay, like how can I help you? Right. And so one of his reasonings and why that he got up to what he was doing is because I wasn't present. And I was like, cool, what does presence feel like? And then going through it was like, I need my wife to be here and not traveling, et cetera, et cetera. I had friends that worked for Lululemon for a long time, like 10, 15 years. And I was like, this seems like a great company. I love yoga. This is like it aligns with the things that I'm, getting excited about. Let's marry the two things. Without it being written, I kind of became this manager that got moved to stores to clean them up that were like team, the team wasn't happy, poor sales, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of tapping into the things that I was helping other people solve for themselves, but in a retail. But it was the first time I had been back in retail since the Gap. I was now in my 30s. There was this whole ego conversation of like, now I'm selling stretchy pants. I'm at a store level. I was in corporate in retail for so long. Now I'm here, and I'm like, okay, my why is my marriage, right? And my partner and my best friend and our family and so forth. And so it was beautiful. And I got to see another side of an experience, or a side of Miami, because Lululemon has it activated, right? And their marketing is community, right? They don't put billboards out and so forth, and they do these events and meeting all these like really cool, beautiful, like OG facilitators of Miami's now wellness scene, and leading cool, we're still responsible for selling and running a business, and the way they format their business is wonderful in terms of like giving full responsibility to their team on the business, the budget, the store. I mean, it's almost like you run a franchise the way they operate it. And so it's beautiful and great. And so it was challenging and all those things. Sadly, it was not enough to fix or change anything. And
with your marriage.
Correct. And so through my time with Lululemon, I went through the divorce. And what was beautiful about working for Lululemon is so often many people don't embrace or try something new when they're stuck into a job or something, a situation they don't like, because they don't have the time, right? Or they're like, I'm dying to take this course, but I can't. I have this. I have these responsibilities. I can't take this time off. I have kids, whatever. All these possible reasons. Lululemon gave you the flexibility, should you want to take some sort of certification within wellness, to adjust your schedules regardless of the level that you were at. And I mean, amongst tons of other beautiful things that they did and do for their teams. And so I went and got my first yoga certification while I was still working for Lululemon. And I was able to leave 2 nights a week and have half-day schedules on the weekends so that I could do and complete this course over 2.5 months. And it opened up something, right? Because in the yoga teacher trainings are designed for you to eventually teach, right? That's why they're called teacher trainings, because you're eventually going to be a teacher. And you know, everyone starts off with like, I'm only here for this, I'm only here for this, I don't want to teach, and so forth. But by the end of the 200 hours, you have to give mock classes, you have to teach, you have to do this, you have to do all these different things. And with working with Lululemon, I would test things. So like our store meetings, I would start with breathwork and meditation and all these different things. And so after the 200 hour and so forth, I felt that I had, and I knew that I had been distracting myself from grieving my divorce by doing all these things. Certification here, doing this, blah, 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 working, my staff, my team, all these things, that I was like, I need to pause. And so I resigned from Lululemon and gave myself what my friends like to call my sabbatical. And I went to Mexico.
Okay. So you went back, or
back.
This was the first time?
No, I went back. Yeah,
okay.
This is back. This is now 2016. This is when Connection like became a brand. And so I was in Mexico, my brother's hotels, and I was just like, listen, I got some crazy ideas of like some really cool experiences that I'd like to like beta test. Would you like let me do them here in exchange for me helping you like build out your reservation program and your website and all the different things. Social media was just kind of coming and so forth, which is crazy to think about. And he did, and he let me kind of use this as my little whiteboard. And, you know, some things worked, some things didn't. And because of my background in marketing and branding, I knew that I needed to do, if I was going to do this, I was going to treat it like a company, right? That I wasn't just going to be Sabrina the sound healer, right? It's funny, my handle on Instagram is from like the yoga certification, the Yogi Sabrina, and I barely do yoga now, and but I just haven't changed it. But I was like, I don't want my clients seeing Sab's the yogi. Like, I want to be able to post photos of my dog and my tacos and everything and have my business be my business.
I think this goes back to not wanting to identify with one thing.
Exactly. Totally.
Just wanting to be free.
100%. Totally. Yeah. And so that's, so it I was like, cool, what do we want to do it? And I was on one of my flights. So I was still living permanently here, but I was basically spending every weekend in Mexico, post-divorce. And I, on one of the flights, I still have the photo in my phone there, you know, as when you're in visuals and all that, there was an article and they had the word connection with the definition and it's spelled phonetically. And I loved it. And I just took a photo of it. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to use this, but I really like this. And this is before any idea and so forth.
So this is an actual word.
It's the word connection. It is the word connection.
Is it
spelled
in the
phonetically.
English? Okay,
It's
gotcha.
Just, it's just
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just spelled phonetically.
Okay.
That's it. And so, and there was a piece of it where as a brand, like, you know, having branding in my background, it isn't like there aren't people that can pronounce it, and they make it more complicated than it is, and they're like, what does it mean? And connection, and I'm like, no. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking a risk, right, by doing this. But I remember going through my phone and like thinking of like, let me see things I've screenshot and ideas, and like, what do I want to call this? And I was like, I just want one word. And I knew kind of like, I identified like my brand ethos of like what I wanted the brand to do, right, for people and myself. And then I found this screenshot and I was like, this is it. And people fought me on it. They're like, no, like I can't pronounce it. I can't say it, which is like what I would like ruled like number one when I'm like telling people, helping them create their brand name. And I was like, ooh, complicado. Like, no, don't say it. Like, we have to change this. Like, and you know, it's still, no matter how like many times I put on the website and so forth, like people know, but it's also like, I'm like, you know what? It's my conversation starter. Like that I'll like tell you, you know, that it's phonetically, and they're like, oh my God. Like, it's always like the, oh, que boba. Like, I didn't realize it, you know?
When I heard you share this story, I had that reaction. I was like, oh.
Everyone has it, like the aha moment. But yeah, and so I would say that, like, you know, very often beautiful things can come from pain, right? And so for me, the divorce, the first one, now we have to reference them, it was a renaissance for me. It was an opportunity for me to paint a different picture, right? And I've done it professionally in other ways, but this was, I have an opportunity to, I mean, you know, I was married for almost 5 years, signing a name, right? Like I literally, that was like the biggest shock for me, was like, how do you, what's my name? What's my maiden name again? Like, how do I sign this again? I forgot. And I was like, I get to make a new signature if I want to, right? Like it was like, I get
your
to
own rebranding.
100%, right? And so it was a rebirth, and it was an opportunity for me to really accept the things that matter. And, you know, often it can happen when you're in a partnership, right? That compromise doesn't become, it's not as it's not the most even scale, right? So compromise, sometimes one is doing more than the other and so forth. And I wouldn't say necessarily he was like really into a bunch of mindful practices, and that's not necessary for me as a partner. Like I don't need someone who meditates and journals, all these things. But I would say that it wasn't necessarily fostering the exploration of these things on the level that when you don't have to share or ask or do, I'm like, okay, cool. And so it catapulted me into what do you want to do, Sabs? Like, what do you want to be known for? And one of the things that, you know, in all the team exercise and all the things we would talk about, I would reference myself as a lighthouse. And, you know, I don't call myself a sound healer now. I reference myself as a sound facilitator, or, you know, and it's because I don't believe that I heal people, right? But I believe that the teachers, you know, of all these different modalities shine light for us, right? They provide light and clarity the same way the retreats for you, right? Is when you remove yourself from your day-to-day, right? Even for an hour on a yoga mat or a fitness class or going for a walk or whatever it is. But when you give yourself this time, right? There's this silence that's full of answers, right? And that for me was that light. And I was like, how can I make this, how can I combine what the rush I would get from like leading great teams and having them change from being unhappy to productive and feeling, you know, grateful and wanting to come to work. How can I do this with these modalities and practices that are necessary? Right? Like that, like I would have probably hurt others if I didn't have these practices in my life. And so I'm like, how can I share these? But for me, if you would have shown this to me in the way that it typically exists, I would have never signed up for any of these things. Right? You know? And even like borderline, like, I mean, it was a very serious Kundalini class. Like everyone was in white, people had the head wraps, and I was like, ¿qué es esto? Like, whoa, like, no. And I'm a New Yorker. I'm like, I wear black. Like, what's going on here? And you know, that was my why. My why was, how can I continue to be a lighthouse for people, but in a way that I can share these modalities in an accessible format to allow them to really connect. And that was it. I was like, and that's what I beta tested and you know, for a while. And then just finally was like, okay, I think Miami can handle this. Like, I think I can try this here. And yeah. And so I made it a business. And of course, you know, now I'm like, of course I would make meditation a lot of work. Like it's like I hustle, and I'm like, I don't know if it's supposed to be this way, but this is also my pattern. And I was like, I will make everything like a system and, you know, an Excel sheet and all of the things. It's just what I do.
Yeah. I've had this curiosity. Why Miami? What draw you to Miami?
So my mom, with her agoraphobia, we'd never gone anywhere, honestly. Like, I think I went to the zoo once with her. And I was in that kind of 20-year-old comparison phase that my friends were having these beautiful mom trips and all these things. And I was like, I want this. I want to go on a vacation with my mom. Like, and you know, and it was almost like I was like envious of it. And so I called my mom's doctor and I was like, hey, like, what can I do? She hadn't been on a plane in 20 years. And I was like, what can I do? How can I, you know, what do you suggest? I really want to take a trip with her. Should I take her to like driving, so forth, whatever. And he's like, how about a cruise? He's like, you know, we may have to give her some extra medication, but like, if you're okay with it, whatever, like, don't expect like her to like go on every excursion or whatever. But like, if you want to just spend quality time with her outside of New York City, why don't you try a cruise? And so I found a cruise leaving from New York, a Norwegian cruise line, the Norwegian Dawn. And, this is 2003. This was September 2003. And we go on this cruise. She is heavily medicated. And I was doing really well. So I got like a suite with like a butler. And like, I was like, well, if she's going to be in the room the entire time, let's just make sure it's nice and at least like whatever. And so it goes to Grand Cayman, Jamaica, whatever. I go on all these excursions myself, but we had every, you know, meal together and whatever. And she was totally fine. She had her book. She was chill. She, you know, she was enjoying herself in the capacity that she could. And the night before we get back, the day at sea, it stops at Miami. And so I was like, I knew that we were going to Miami. So I was like, I'm not getting off the boat at Miami. Like, I go to Miami all the time. I don't need to get off the boat. So I decided it was the perfect night to gamble. And I'm not a gambler. And so I meet some old man and he teaches me how to play blackjack. And I'm up all night with this. He had to have been like at least 90. I don't remember his name. He's definitely not around anymore. And great night, but I was ridiculously hungover. Like, I'm not a drinker. And so it was like, you know, he was drinking whiskey. I was like, I don't even drink whiskey. We were doing this. I won money. It was great. So I get back to the room and I'm obviously not waking up for breakfast. I'm like, I don't care. Nor am I getting off the ship because we're in Miami. And I wake up and my mom's not in the room. And I'm like, okay. Red alert. Like, what's happening here? Like, I'm very hungover, but like, what is happening? So forth. I asked the guy, he's like, oh, I saw her get out. And I was like, wait, I'm sorry. But like, you haven't seen her get out for 7 days. And now suddenly it's like, and so I call her, it doesn't answer. Finally, she answers and I hear blaring music in the background. And I was like, where on the ship are you? And she's like, oh, I'm out on the ship. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And she's like, yeah. She's like, I woke up, we pulled into the pier at sunrise and it was so beautiful. And I just got a wave of like, I want to go, and I haven't been in Miami in 40 years. And so I decided to get off the ship and I'm with this really nice family. And she's like, where are we? And he's like, what's the cafe on Ocean Drive? Mangoes. Thank you very much. She was at Mangoes, blaring salsa music. She's like, I'm having a mojito. I'll see you when I get back. And I'm like, okay. She gets back. She said she took a very mild dose of her medicine. And my mother is a different human.
Wow.
Like a different human. And I had moved out at 16. I didn't live with her. Like, we had a very like interesting dynamic. And so to see her in this light, I was like, this is amazing. And I was like, you need to move to Miami.
Wow.
And she's like, what? And I was like, yeah. And so, and I have a few regrets in my life. This is one of them. I hated my stepfather. He was also battling addiction and I did not like him. And they lived in the house I grew up in, the apartment I grew up in, and so forth. And so I somehow bamboozled her, or I thought I was, to leave him. And I would move her to Miami if she moved without him. And they were like in a really tough place and whatever. And she agreed. And my mother had never driven in her life. And so, New York City, not necessary. And she wasn't really mobile, so it wasn't a big deal. But yeah, I moved her down a week before my 24th birthday. And while I was here, in that drive and moving her down, she declared that she didn't want to be down here by herself. And I just was like, if I really want this change for her and us, I guess I got to try. And so I called my boss and I was like, I know this is crazy, but like, is there a way I can request a transfer? And like, I'll take whatever role and so forth. And it happened very, very quickly, but I moved down here with her, and she still doesn't know how to drive. And we've been here for 20 years, thank God, because she's wouldn't be safe. But yeah, she was the driving force literally on why Miami. Wow. And she loves it. She's a different,
she goes out.
She's mobile. She goes out. She's had health stuff because she just has in other areas of her life. She didn't take care of herself. But I mean, she still has her panic attacks and things like that. And all of the journey of like introducing her to breath work and different things happened here in Miami. But yeah, she's the reason why Miami became home.
That's an amazing story.
It's crazy. Yeah.
That's nuts. Incredible.
I know. It's nuts. Everyone's like, you got to call Norwegian Cruise Lines. She loves, I absolutely hate cruising. She's like obsessed. She's gone on the Dawn like 7 times after with her girlfriends.
That's why you remember the name?
Totally. 100% just obsessed with it. She's like, I love Norwegian. I'm like, okay. She'd be a great sponsor for them.
There's something so beautiful about everything that you have shared and the importance of the different places, like the cities. Like, I feel like it's a pattern in what you're sharing. Yeah. Like your mom's story, your own story. Like there's a pattern about the context, the place that kind of like helped you and supported you in many different ways. Yeah. Both you and your mom. So let's get into what you actually do today. So like the type of offerings, the different modalities that you offer in the studio, sound healing, meditation, movement, journaling, which I love seeing that you do that, because journaling is one that I find like it's one of those things that I'm like, why isn't everyone journaling?
Totally. I know.
It's like the easiest one.
I know, but everyone you know what it is? I think everyone there's a feminine energy to putting pen to paper, despite there being beautiful male authors and so forth. But there is this like keeping a diary, kind of thing that I think people are hesitant. Men are hesitant because they're like, I don't want to keep a diary. For the most part, that's their dialogue. Or women are like, I don't want to tell, right? Or it's overall like, I don't want to put thoughts on paper, or I can't write, right? And that's usually what prevents people to it. But yeah, it's magical and so powerful. And for us, it appears easy, but it's really difficult for a lot of people. Yeah. I incorporate in all my retreats. And the difference between the first day of journaling to the last day it's wild to watch because of for some people it's really difficult and foreign. Yeah.
How do you usually introduce them to journaling? Is it with specific questions?
Prompts. I think that's the best way. So connection is really like basically like my brain. I've done different jobs. We joke about the different lives and different careers. I owned a hair salon for 5 years in the beach. I mean, I've done a lot of different shit, but my brain operates that way. And so I wouldn't just be content if connection was just sound healing, right? And the other piece is healing journeys, day-to-day practices. There are some days that I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to hear any sound. I don't want to hear music. There's some days that I need to pump up the music and have a sweaty dance party. There's some days that I journal several times versus just my morning practice, right? And so I don't think that there's a cookie cutter formula. And I also believe that like, I think it's beautiful people who wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and have their routine and they pray and they do this and they do that and they have their celery juice and all that. I can't handle another layer of pressure of like, oh my God, I didn't wake up at 5. Am I doing this right? Like life is difficult enough. Come to it when you come to it, but come to it, right? The consistency and the practice is what's key, but don't give another layer of pressure of like when it has to happen and how. And also that you have to there's certain, like I journal every day, right? But that's because it's necessary. It's a conversation I want to have on a daily basis. I don't I don't move my body every single day. If I do, it's yoga one day or Pilates this or running this way or just dancing. And so connection was very much that. And also knowing how to weave them together, right? Is because some of them pair really nicely. to allow people to go deeper or lean in more into something they're already working on or aware of. And so accessibility is a huge kind of brand ethos for me, and making it feel, meeting people where they are, right? So language is really important to me, and the words I choose when I teach and what I say, and there being a balance of like real life, right? And it's why like I share the way I do on social media, on my personal and so forth, about the things that happen to my life, is that like I'm not immune. I have all the resources. I have an obscene amount of certifications because I went through that syndrome of like, I can't teach till I have all this information.
I would love to talk to you about that.
So I have lots of those. and I also have days and I'm like, today fucking sucks. And I journaled and I meditated and I played sound bowls and I did this and I still feel like caca, and I'm just going to let myself feel like shit today, and that's it, right? And I'm not immune to it, and I'm human. And the reason why I can understand why you came to my class because you feel a certain way is because I have felt that way. Actually, I feel that way right now, right? And being okay and not putting this persona of like I'm this untouchable, mindfulness teacher that like feels no feels and tells and judges you and tells you like, oh, it's because you're not doing this, right? And so I wanted to really make sure that whatever I introduced felt right and gave people choice. Like it's almost like a tasting. I give you a little mindful tasting in our experiences. The studio is a little more deeper, but like the events we do at the hotels is kind of like my taste test. And it's the seed to hopefully be like, I liked what I felt during the sound part or the movement part or this part, and I want to explore deeper. And then that's when Casa comes through for that more kind of intimate. And I'm still aware of language and all of that. But so in that is how do I find, unless you sign up for a full breathwork class, I'm going to do very accessible breathwork exercises in my experiences so that you can at least feel the initial sensations. And then if you want that full hour breathwork journey, you come to my studio, right? Same thing with sound. You get your 15, 20-minute sound bath in our experiences. Journal prompts are huge, right? And so it takes off the pressure of not knowing what to write, which is usually our biggest excuse, right? And giving them some sort of framework of what are you grateful for. I always bookend my journaling day with that of gratitude. And it's beautiful. It's beautiful to see people embrace new things. And also not everything is for everyone. And so I'm okay with that as well, right? There'll always be someone in a class or experience that just something didn't resonate with them, and that's fine. And I think people find their people, right? Like I am not going to be the sound healer for everyone, Yeah.
I resonate with many things that you're sharing. So my first certification, because I am going through that stage of like, I have to learn it all so I can give people the proper tools. But I also understand that there's a balance. Like, yes, there's a lot of benefit from the classes and learning how to teach and, translate and transmute the message and the energy of what we are learning. And at the same time, it could be like, self-sabotage,
could be. It can't, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
But my first training was as a modern meditation teacher. And the modern aspect of it was understanding that we live in a modern world where our life is fast-paced and we don't have access to meditating for 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. Like everyone has different, lifestyles.
Totally.
And the idea as a teacher in this modern world is to meet you where you're at.
Yeah, adapt to that. Yeah.
And the more I've been learning, so that one was mindfulness based, which I love mindfulness modality. But the more I've been exploring on my own and like learning from other modalities, the more I recognize that, and I recently learned about this term, like our cognitive fingerprint. And based on our cognitive fingerprint, then there will be different type of meditations that will be beneficial to us or will actually create the opposite.
Totally.
Like that's why so many people say like, I cannot meditate. Yes, there's a lack of understanding of what
There's
actual
some
meditation
but
is.
some stuff is, yeah.
Right, but there's a lot of people that have tried it, and it's like, it just makes me feel worse, you know, like more anxiety, more whatever. So I think that is so important, like recognizing that there's a rainbow of, you know, expressions for every single one of us.
Yeah.
And having that variety, I love that you offer that and that you focus on that. Because you love science, what is one thing that you have learned about any of these modalities from the science lens that you find really beneficial, fascinating, whatever it is? One or more, if
yeah,
more
I mean, I would say that like breath and sound, right? And breath obviously is a resource and tool that we have like with us, right? And like when you start to learn about proper breathing, right, you're like, holy shit, I've been doing this wrong for a really long time. But it's just, you know, I share this in my big events, right? Those are a lot of first timers, is we have this natural ability to change and regulate our nervous system and our brainwaves just by ourselves. You don't have to go and sign up for a ton of classes and all these different things. And, you know, yes, I do believe that like different modalities are wonderful, like therapy and all these different things, but like you have the ability within yourself to change how you feel, and in turn, how you make others feel and how you connect with others through simple things like regulating your breath, right? And so that for me, when I go back to the lens of like how I grew up, right? Like I say this often when I teach my courses in sound healing, is I teach every time I come to an event or whatever, I'm like, envision the kids you grew up with, Sabs, and that you're talking to them. Because if I could have given these resources, if I had these resources growing up as a kid, you know, things that we don't now, there's much more awareness of anxiety. And sadly, like kids are getting labeled and tested for 1,000 things that like, you know, it was, you know, growing up, it was like, oh, he just needs a spanking. Like, you know, for me, but there's such awareness now of mental disorder. And it's still a conversation that needs to be more open and more public, but it wasn't one you had growing up in, you know, in the 80s, and especially not like, I grew up in a predominantly Dominican neighborhood. Like you didn't talk about certain, there was a lot of taboo things that we talked about, you know, growing up, and, you know, anxiety, like all of these things, right? Like I was embarrassed to tell people about my mom, you know? And so, that's my lens of like teaching to that. And so I knew that like if I stuck to the science piece of it, right? Because very often spirituality is applied to these modalities and they live together beautifully, right? And in my own personal practice, one could say that I'm a little more spiritual than I am in the brand sense, but that comes back to the accessibility, right? And so like when I used to teach a lot of yoga, I didn't use Sanskrit. And that was choice. Because it's another language. Like it was probably the most difficult part for me next to learning the anatomy was the Sanskrit. And I was like, this is a whole other, I already speak Spanish and English. Like I have to learn a whole other language like in 200 hours. Like what is this? They don't have a Rosetta Stone for, you know, yoga and everything else. And so I made a choice. I was like, no one knows what this is. Like people know downward dog, child's pose. Like I am, you know, and that even alone is another term that they have to learn. And so I think that learning these really simple about, you know, what our body does when it inhales and exhales, and like it's wild how we're designed and how very often we put ourselves in certain positions, right? With the inner critic and the natural response and how we translate things. And so, yeah, I would say that like understanding and learning and witnessing the physical impact of something just as simple as intentional breathing. We breathe 1,000 times a day, but intentionally doing breath work and what sound does, right? Like music, right? And I've always been musically driven. I've never played an instrument. We played piano growing up, but just music has been always part of me that the sound just felt natural. And then when I understood the science behind the vibrations and what their impact is on our bodies, I was sold. I was like, this is it, you know, and it's physics, it's pure physics, and, you know, and so all of it, and, you know, and that's more, but also like making the science not complicated, right? Because I may love and geek out on the science piece, right? But I start talking about, you know, frequencies and hertz and so forth. And like people are like cross-eyed and they're like, what? Like, what does that mean? And so also making sure that, you know, the language and the choice of that, but it's being able to share that we have, you know, very often the answers we look for are within, you know?
Accessibility is like, you've mentioned this, but it's, for whatever reason, I am going home with this word and I'm gonna journal on it. If you had to explain to, I'm gonna say it, to my husband, who I would like to bring to one of your sound healing events, how would you explain what is happening in his body with sound? Because that's literally something that he asked, and I was like, I understand it. I can visualize it. I can feel it. I don't know how to explain it to you.
So, some of the best ways, especially with my male demographics, is I like to refer to it as an adult nap, right? So we are these. So sound is vibration. Music is vibration. Sound vibration against my vocal cords omits the sound of my voice. Sound is a vibration, and everything is in motion. Everything we can see, feel, hear, everything has a physical vibration to it. Some of it we're aware of, some of it we're not, but everything has a molecule, a cell that has some sort of motion to it. And this motion has a weight to it. Some of them are heavier, lighter, etc. Some of these weights make us feel great, some of it doesn't. Sound and vibration travels 5 times faster in water than any other matter. We are predominantly water. So it makes us these natural conduits of energy and vibration because of our body's makeup. So it's why we have the ability, like you meet someone, like love at first sight, right? And you feel it, right? You know, when you like meet someone, you're like, this is my person, right? You and I met and I'm like, I feel like I've known her for a long time, right? Like you have this. You also have the other sensation where you're like, this person is not for me, right? And, you know, hopefully you're not rude about it, but it's like you feel it, right? Your body tells you very more before, right? And that is the energy that we exchange. And we are constantly exchanging energy, whether we like to or not. And based on the world that we live in, it's a very kind of overly stimulated, a lot of information, we are constantly receiving and exchanging even when we don't want to, right? Everything that's going on, the current global climate is crazy. And so because of that, our energetic system, our nervous system, which is basically the computer of our bodies, it tells us how to feel, right? It tells us whether we are in rest and restore or we're fight or flight. And because we're in such a stimulated world, our bodies are spending a lot of time in fight or flight, even if we don't really think we're stressed or freaked out. But like driving on US 1 is like automatically your nervous system's like, what is happening? And it's designed to be able to send these signals and bounce back and forth, right? And be like, okay, we're done protecting ourselves, go back into restore. But this time and this dance between the two is becoming sluggish because of the overstimulation and so forth. And so energetically, more and more people are finding that they're having a lot of like physical ailments like insomnia, headaches, body aches, all these things, which are typical signs of us being energetically off. We each, you and I, have a song, I like to say. So the best way to explain like what happens in a sound bath is think of inside of our bodies having this beautiful orchestra. And when we feel great, those days where we're like, today is going to be my day, right? You wake up, everything's great. And it means that your orchestra, they've all rehearsed, their instruments are in tune, they're super connected, they all slept well, they're playing at peak level. They're ready for Carnegie, right? They're there. The days that you don't feel great, right? The days that are harder than others, that you're foggy, you're irritable, you're reactive, emotional, whatever it is, something is off in your orchestra. Someone's hungover, someone's instrument's not in tune, someone forgot their sheet music. Like there is something off. That is where this aha of I have the ability and obligation to help my orchestra out. I need to get them back into tune. I need to help them with whatever it is that's throwing us off. I need to help myself. I need to restore my song. There are different ways you can do so. Going for a run, moving your body, journaling, all these things. Sound healing is one of the most passive yet most powerful ways, because we receive sound not only through our auditory system, but through our skin and our bones. So it is this like fully immersive, like I like to call it, like the sound massage. It goes everywhere. And the way our bodies are designed, everything we think, we feel, we've experienced directly and indirectly is stored in our tissues and our lungs. And our body does it because it's like, should this happen again, I want to know how to respond to protect ourselves, right? We're designed to protect this beautiful, intricate system that we are. But there's certain things that I'm like, I don't really necessarily know if I want to hang on to, but our body doesn't differentiate like this is good or bad. We don't want to feel grief. We don't want to hold on to anger and all these things. So what a sound bath does, similar to like paving a road, right, is that it fills the pockets of where there is possibly some sort of disharmony or a block or overuse of different parts of our bodies. And it balances it out. It helps restore your natural harmony in a way that is very relaxing. So much so that it puts your brain into a wave that is typically only really achieved when you are sleeping, which is why I call it an adult nap. So I'm like, at the very least, you're going to enjoy a very delicious 45-minute nap. And so it tricks the brain to think it's sleeping, which is why some people do fall asleep, because it starts to tell the body we're resting. But it's what happens when we rest. It's why sleep is so important, is our body makes collagen, silica, our liver enzymes, our digestive enzymes, all of our systems renew and restore so that they can be there for us in our waking hours. But when we don't sleep, or we're not sleeping properly or enough, all of those systems start to also slow down and in turn affect how we feel, which is both physical and energetically. And so it's really powerful. And, there are studies, and sound is being, explored far more now than it ever has, in terms of, the equivalent of a sound bath being close to like 6 hours of really deep sleep for the body and all these different things. And so it's beautiful. It's a sensation of feeling very restored and renewed. And then there's a piece of it, kind of a little more out there, less science, of when we are with one thing, right? When we monotask, why like the Japanese and their beautiful tea ceremonies, right? When we're with one thing, when we monotask, similar to like showering, we have some of the most aha moments and ideas is because we're focused on washing our hair, our bodies, whether you brush your teeth, whatever, but like I'm in the shower and I'm showering. It's because you've reduced the chatter in your mind that the shower provides this environment that you're like, wait a minute, hold on. Genius thought, right? Or I didn't think of this, or, oh, that's the answer for what I've been dealing with, and so forth. Those moments happen in a sound bath because you're with your body. You feel every sensation. You hear, right? It's a full auditory experience that in stillness, we're able to really tune in. And again, the answers, our body knows, right? Like our body knows what's good for us, what's not good for us. We just don't listen. And a sound bath allows you to listen, which is where some people find discomfort in it, because it's like, yeah, there's a reason why I've avoided like not listening. But it's also really beautiful. And so it's there's a lot of different benefits for everyone, and you don't have to come to sound because you're dealing with something. It's just, we could all use a really restful and restorative experience.
So even if someone falls asleep during a session,
they receive everything.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. You don't miss a beat. No, I've had some really had like really beautiful, almost like lucid dreams in their bath experience of where they went, and they see colors or situations and things. And so, yeah, I mean, your body is receiving the sound,
I had a very interesting experience with your sound healing at the end. There was one specific sound. I just wanted to laugh.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, it was like giggly, like this very kind of like innocent type of like laugh.
It was probably the chimes.
It was the Japanese
the koshi,
chime,
the koshi
maybe.
chimes. Yeah. Which are very, very, very youth-like. And I usually end the sound baths with that because of how nostalgic it is and childlike. Because sometimes if you are dealing with something, right, think about like sound is vibration and moving, right? And if I store everything that happens to me here and you come in and you start shaking me up, it's going to move it, right? And I'm going to think about it and feel it, and it's going to bring it to surface. And so not everyone has this like very euphoric experience. Some of it's like, shit, okay, like I have to do this, or I have to face this, or accept this, or whatever. And so I always end with an instrument that provides some sort of like sweetness so that there is that like childlike laugh, or like you feel like a little embrace, or like the sounds of like the ice cream truck, you know, coming on the street, like whatever that kind of emotion part of it is, so that if it did stir something that was like heavy, it would at least kind of like close us out in a little bit more of a sweet. But yeah, the reactions. I just had my course this weekend, and there was one of the questions like, what are the different reactions you've had? And laughing is a primary reaction to sound. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I definitely experienced it. Yeah. How do you integrate meditation? I ask because meditation is kind of like my I love that practice. How do you integrate it? What do you love about it? Anything that you want to share?
So all my experiences will include meditation. Okay. Some short, some longer, some, you know, are depending on what the experience is. But again, especially for like our hotel events, like it will always be. But I find that for me myself, right? Like I think that like it takes a while for people to get, right? And so if I like you sat down, lay down, and I just start cranking out my sound bowls, right? It can be jarring. And I think that you have to honor the fact that like it's a Monday night, they just had their whole work day, they drove here, like I have to set the tone. I need to get them kind of to their bodies and their breath first before I open them up, right? To receive and to be that. So I always include some sort, whether it's like a simple body scan, visual, and because of the accessibility, usually visual guiding is what I do in terms of meditation for my group settings, because it's the most accessible for those that are new to it. And so in terms of professionally, always for me, I have difficulty sleeping, and more so because I teach a lot at night. And when I receive and share, and some of our events are really big, I'm wired, right? Like it is a massive exchange, and I'm hyped, and I'm grateful, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I get to do this for a living. Like all these emotions, but then I'm like, okay, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. We have to go to sleep. So I meditate both in the morning and night, different approaches and styles. The night is pure intent of starting to shut myself down and relax. And so, you know, it has also been like a primary guiding light for me. And when I don't, it's obvious, right? So like I know when I don't journal and when I don't meditate, how I show up in terms of like I'm more reactive, or I'm like I make I'm like almost like clumsy. Like I'm just like it's like messy, and I'm usually not
self-aware physically.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, I stopped teaching yoga. I have like one private left that does yoga, and I love it. It's a beautiful practice. I practice on myself. I haven't been to a studio in probably 2 years. I have my dear friends are always trying to get me. And part of it is because it's not ingrained in my personal day-to-day practices, I have difficulty sharing it. So just because I'm a 500-hour yoga certification. If I'm not doing it, if I can't authentically tell you like, hey, this week on my mat, this happened, I can't share it. Right. And so that is why meditation and breath are two things that I use often, and journaling. And so I try to weave it as much as possible, because I also think, and that goes back to like my background in sales, is when you're real, right? Like the consumer knows, right? Like you can feel it, you know, when this is like real deal, right? And like, so when you meet the chef of a restaurant, right, you're like, oh my God, like this person loves food, right? And he loves what he does, and he's an artist. And so, but then you also like, I've met people that I'm like, you're just regurgitating whatever you learn in your certification, but it's not coming from your soul, right? It's not coming from your heart. And so that's why I think I weave, and I'm, you know, I've had some clients who are like, I just want sound when they hire me for like group events, stuff like that. And I was like, I can't do it. Like, I just won't. And, you know, I also have boundaries that I want to honor within my thing, but I'm like, it is in the best interest of the person experiencing this to give them a little bit of this, you know, like, you know, I think there's a time and place, right, for everything. And like, yes, I've done full sound baths with, you know, very little, you know, a little bit of a minute intro and then we're in it. But that's like, they're part of a whole retreat and like they've experienced other things and so forth. But meditation is I would say meditation and sound, or, you know, there's not, those two are kind of in the same level for me of importance to make sure that they're always present in some shape, way, or form in anything that I create.
As we wrap up, you just mentioned the heart and not sharing from the heart, or of course, this is the name of the podcast, The Way of the Heart. How do you think these practices tap into the wisdom of the heart, or even if you want to share about your own perspective on the heart and what you think it is for us human beings?
Yeah, so I have a beautiful community, and so poor people that have come to my events all the time, they have to hear a lot of repeat. But one of my kind of like guiding like mantras or phrases is living loud and loving hard. A dear friend spoke at my wedding, and she said it as her closing line because I say it often as a reminder. And what that means to love hard, right, is I've been married twice, right? And I've so fortunate that I have felt love deeply and fully. And I know friends and clients that have never experienced love. And there are some people that leave this journey never experiencing that. And I'm grateful, right, for it. And I think that, you know, I give my heart in every aspect of my life, to my business, to my friends, to my romantic partners. I wear my heart on my sleeve. And that was something when I realized that I was hardening, when I realized that I was being labeled as this typical New Yorker, right, who is, you know, evil and aggressive and so forth. I was like, what's missing, right? And it was the vulnerability, and it was the, you know, the wearing your heart on your sleeve and giving it all, regardless of what you were going to get back, and also of the impact, right? The impact of being hurt and losing people, you know, friends, partners. I've closed, you know, I've owned businesses, I've closed businesses, all of these things. But leading with the heart has made my entire journey and every part of it more rewarding than ever. It does feel good to know that the other person knows that you're giving your heart, right? That you're giving your all. Like, my friends know, like, they're my chosen family. Like, they know that, like, where are we hiding this body type of conversation? Like, if we needed to, you know, like, I love fully. And the same thing with my business and my partners. And it's hard because, especially with the business piece, like, I give connection as of right now, how it stands is just me. And so when I get feedback, I'm like, ouch, because it's me, right? And I'm like, that hurts because it's me. But the flip side of that is that the reason why I'm able to make the impact and get the other kind of feedback and messages of how I've helped people find clarity in their worlds is because I've been leading through my heart, right? And I think that that is a commitment and a reminder that when I find myself hardening, right? I had a teacher share around never clasping your hands, right? You can't grab life if your hands are clasped. And you can't love and feel and experience life fully if your heart is closed, right? And so I'd rather, everyone was like, I can't believe you got married again, and here I am divorced for a second time. I have no regrets. I gave love a chance. I didn't harden myself. I'm not going to make a declaration that I'm never going to get married again or so forth, whether it's a necessity, no, but like, I'm not going to close myself up to the possibility of loving again. And I may have my heart broken again, but the joy of that moment, right, is great. And like loving what you do, and fully, and loving your friends, and just living through that lens is worth all of the potential risk, because there's also beauty in that, right? There's beauty in honoring the hurt and the grief and finding the lessons. But I'd rather go through all of it than not lead through my heart. So it's my daily reminder of just keep a little heart pinned on my sleeve, regardless of the potential collisions I could have.
I love everything that you have shared in our conversation. Thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your presence, for the work that you do, for all of it.
Thank you.
Where can people find you? Anything that you want to share?
Offer? Yeah, it's we are permanently based in Miami. I have a beautiful relationship with some beautiful hotels in Miami Beach. We work with the One Hotel, the Edition, where we offer really beautiful community experiences for those that are really curious. It's kind of like a great platform for those that are just like really curious and want to explore. It's like what I said again, my little taste test. And then I have my studio, which is in Mimo, and it's where we do kind of more of our private, small, intimate, semi-private group experiences. Instagram, although I have this beautiful love-hate relationship with this platform, it is the best way to see, and it's at Connection, which is Connection spelled phonetically. And my website as well has our full calendar, and we have almost something like every day for the most part. So lots of ways. And then online also, you can listen to some meditations and sound healings that are pre-recorded for those that can't make it to our in-person experiences.
I'll have all of the links on the show notes for everyone that is interested.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And like I said at the beginning, conversations.
Yes.
This is going to happen in the future.
Amazing.
Whether there's cameras or not. I would love to have more conversations.
Same. Thank you for this.